I'm at right now and check out this view for a second. And then, so you see right there, it looks like the ocean is at high tide right now. Or a lot of surf's coming in. I ask y'all keep things in prayer as it relates to, I think before, the day before we're supposed to leave from here, there's some storms that are going to be coming in. And so, we just pray for that. If the Lord wants to delay us and we have more time together and there's provision for that, then so be it. But of course, there's always hassles and things like that. So we don't know what God's going to do, but we know He's in control. All right, so I guess what I'll do right now is I'm sitting back in this chair because of my back on this couch, sort of like couch thing. And basically, I think what I want to do is I want to talk about how I found out about this dragon prophecy thing. I'm on Twitter or X, and so I encounter stuff through Twitter. So I mean, I did see that D'Souza, I think his name is, just made a new documentary, and I saw people responding to it, but I didn't look at the responses. Then someone close to Janet and I, who's also in seminary, contacted me and me and Janet and said, "Hey, I got access to this documentary. Watch it and let me know what you think." That type of thing, like that. And so I watched the documentary, Dragon Prophecy. I had no idea that it had anything connected to Jonathan Cahn. I'll tell you up front, I'm not a fan of Jonathan Cahn. That's probably one of my greatest criticisms of the Dragon Prophecy documentary. But, so let me tell you how this developed. So, okay, I heard that Dr. Andy Woods recommended it, and like, okay, Jan and I like, well, okay, we'll watch it together. And I was watching it. It started out with news, and then it started getting into, the interpretation of things, the events of October 7th and all of that. And there's some good stuff, and there's some bad stuff. I think the things that Dr. Woods that I later read make sense as far as why the video could be useful. But ultimately, I do think it does harm dispensationalism's case, and I know most of y'all probably not dispensationalists, but I am. And I think that also hurts the church because it gives people a wrong view of Israel. It may help garner support in the short term politically, but I think it could do damage long term because of the hermeneutics of Jonathan Cahn. All right, so let me back up for a minute. So, I'm told about this documentary. Janet and I start watching it, and Janet's like, "Why are you reacting?" I mean, I told her, I said, "Okay, this is what we're going to do. Hey, Honesty, what we're going to do is we're going to watch this video, and we're going to talk about it and pause." Well, I was kind of already frustrated, and I know that can color my initial impression, but I was already frustrated because we got blessed. We have a smart TV. It's a Google TV here, but whenever I tried to screencast the Apple phone, I found out that you could only do it through a third-party app. So then I go to the third-party app, and then, of course, they're saying it's free for 3 days, and then charging you $19 or something like that. So I got to do my best to delete that app after, because I don't imagine I'm going to use it in the future. And $19 a month is too much. Hey, Howdy. So basically, oh, and by the way, Janet's cooking and cleaning and doing stuff like that. So she wants to be here, and she's listening to me right now. That's the benefit. Janet calls this apartment a studio apartment. But yeah, it's got the kitchen all built in. Thanks, Howdy, for buying the memberships for these people. And so, yeah, basically, I really appreciate that, Howdy. Basically, I'm talking to Janet about things, I said, okay, let me tell you how typically whenever I'm observing or reacting to something, or even if I have to do like a formal critique, what I'm doing. Okay, we got the title, The Dragon Prophecy. So I told Janet, it's like my mind immediately goes to Revelation 12. Okay? But because of my eschatology and my ecclesiology, I'm like, Revelation 12 hasn't happened yet. You know? Yeah, there's some motifs that build on certain things, but Revelation 12 hasn't happened yet. So, dragon prophecy, okay? So my thought is this about a future prophecy? Is this video making a claim about a present prophecy? Is this just clickbait? What's going on here? You know, because the first time I ever came across D'Souza was with the voter fraud machine documentary. I don't remember what that was called, but that's where I first came across, you know, his stuff. And so I was like, okay, it's D'Souza. So, all right, we'll check it out. And so those are my thoughts. And I'm telling Janet, and as I'm watching, it's talking about the news. And here's the thing, our Wi-Fi is not the greatest, at least when it's connected through Google TV. So with this third-party app. And so it was like breaking in and out in the speech, but we stopped and we talked about the things that were in the documentary as we were going. And I was okay until I saw.
He keep on watching the same topic. And then he said.
Janet's offering her commentary.
He said that, hey, this is already repeated, always like that, the same thing, the same thing. So that's why I suggest, why you cannot just make your own.
Oh, I wasn't to that part yet, but I'll get there, Asawako. Don't worry. So yeah, we're watching the chopping, you know, this choppy documentary because of the technology. We're still thankful we can watch it. And we're talking about things as we're going, but I about lost it when he got to seeing that this whole video was nothing but Jonathan Cahn. And I didn't know at the time that Jonathan Cahn had written a book called The Dragon Prophecy. So let me just back up real quick and tell you why I'm not a fan of Jonathan Cahn. I first heard of Jonathan Cahn probably 2011. People had read The Harbinger, I think it was, and they were asking me, you know, their views about it, you know, because they knew I was, you know, a dispensationalist, and dispensationalists typically are for Israel. And so I read The Harbinger, and I was like, man, this is just straight up allegorization. He's reading America into this. America has no covenant with Israel, you know, and there were some other books that came out, but later on, I was blessed to meet Dave James. Dave James, I can't remember the name of the organization he was part of, but he was Kurt knows him. I think he was a dispensationalist that died during COVID, and he wrote a book, Harbinger, Fact or Fiction. And you could search out Harbinger, Dave James, Jonathan Cahn, Harbinger, Fact or Fiction lawsuit, and you'll find articles online talking about that issue. Essentially what happened, I think it was Charisma Press, or I don't know if it was directly Jonathan Cahn, but essentially Dave James's book was so damaging to Jonathan Cahn that essentially it was almost like and I don't know the proper language, it was essentially like a cease and desist or a lawsuit type situation. In other words, Jonathan Cahn wanted to shut down criticism. Okay? So this is an example where a dispensationalist is challenging Jonathan Cahn, is blurring distinctions between Israel and the church, as well as reading America into prophecies and things like that. So you got that dynamic going on. And then, of course, I'm watching this documentary and I see D'Souza is not only just interviewing Jonathan Cahn, but this whole interview is propping up the false teachings of Jonathan Cahn. You know, his so-called prophecies and everything. So I'm listening to it and it's the same type of stuff. Like, as of now, I think it's a fallacy to say that the Philistines are the Palestinians. my understanding is it wasn't until like I think it was Emperor Trajan that named the land Palestine. Okay, and it had no connection to the Philistines. But Khan tries to go to the Old Testament about Gaza and try to do this reading what's going on in the news with that passage, and it's just allegorization. It's just poor hermeneutics all around, and that's a problem for me. And so I'm telling Janet about all this, right? And then Janet has me go on and explain it's a detail. That's how Janet is. If I make an assertion, Janet's like, prove it. Show me why you believe that. All right? So that ended up me giving my explanation. And then she's like, well, what's the problem? And I said, go to Ezekiel 36. So, and I said, you tell me if the things mentioned in Ezekiel 36 have happened yet. So we walked through Ezekiel 36. Janet recorded it like she records everything. Janet has all my sins recorded. She's probably got all of her fights recorded, but not when we make up. But, you know, I'm glad she catalogs things for memories and all of that stuff. But, yeah, so basically, I'm talking to Janet about all of that. We're going through the passages, and she's recording. And I started explaining to her about the problem about historicism being read into a dispensational view of things, and then dispensationalists being accused of date setting and all of that. And I'm like, well, no, it's the charismatics. The ones that they have a dream about Jesus coming back in the rapture or things like that, that want to say that's. It's the charismatic dispensationalists, which I believe is inconsistent, that are the problem. It's people that are having faulty hermeneutics that are the problem, or borrowing from something else. The people that are doing newspaper exegesis. And I explained to Janet about how well-meaning Hal Lindsey was, you know, influencer Dallas Theological Seminary. I told her about the other book that came out, 88 Reasons Why Jesus Christ Would Come Back in 1988, about how people assumed the fig tree is Israel, 1948, add 40 years, a generation supposedly is 40 years long, gets you to 1988, and just all the mess associated with that. And I feel like there are some, even dispensationalists, that are doing something similar whenever they adopt some of the arguments that like Jonathan Cahn is talking about, or some of these other people. I'm not saying he's date setting. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying it's the overall same type of trend or approach to scripture, and I think there's a serious problem there. So yeah, and then after that, as Janet was just saying right now, she can't get on camera right now, but she was saying that after watching that documentary, and I had to force myself to watch the rest of it, and mainly listen to it. I stopped watching the images. Janet was watching it on her phone, and I was right beside her listening to it, you know, fuming. And of course, that could mean that I'm not being as objective. I might have missed some things. But anyway, and then I started showing Janet stuff on YouTube about these dangerous trends that I see, where people are, you know, talking about Jared Kushner, Trump, and the Abrahamic Accords, and all of these things like this, right? And people are all clickbaiting right now, saying, "How's the tribulation started?" You know, all of this stuff. Now, stage setting, I have no problem with, right? But whenever you make a claim that something is a prophecy, and I'm speaking in general about the landscape, I'm not speaking specifically about the dragon prophecy yet, okay? But when you start making claims like that, it's dangerous and it's harmful to dispensationalism. If dispensationalism suffers, then a wrong view of Israel, it gets perpetuated in the churches. And so in a sense, Israel suffers in that way, as well as the body of Christ, for not being rightly oriented to God's plans and purposes. So you got all of that going on, right? And so Janet's like, I'm showing her all this stuff, and I'm walking around, I'm pacing, you know, while she's doing some stuff online, I think related to the earthquake or something, and also plans back, is she going to be able to get back to her island and all that stuff. And she's like, instead of doing all this, why don't you go live and make your own video about it? Like, okay, let me take a shower, and I'll do that. And so here I am. Uh, it's we're planning to go see the sunset by the beach, probably around 5 something. Um, but yeah, I got that time, and I got my wire in case my power goes out. My battery goes low. I think I'm at 66 right now. So you got all that going on, right? And got the hat, got Janet's shirt put on, and I got the cup, drinking coffee here, right? This is not merch. These are gifts from Janet. Things that she made out of love. You like the painting behind me? Yeah, this apartment came fully furnished. I'd show you the rest, but it's all messy right now. But yeah, so basically, um, let me back up. After watching my initial impression, I went back on Twitter and I started looking at what other people said about the Dragon Prophecy. That's when I found out that there was actually written by a book by Khan. In the process of that, I found posts by Dr. Andy Woods, saying, and then him interacting with D'Souza, recommending why he thinks Christians should watch the movie. He basically said because it makes arguments from that the Bible is what do you call it when you dig in the ground? Archaeologically accurate. You know that the motif of anti-Semitism, those ideas are in there. So I agree with all the good things that Andy Wood said, okay? So because he's already commended the video, and he did this in his pastor's point of view where he gave his recommendations for that, I'm going to focus on the criticism, okay? Here's the issue. As far as I know, the Philistine-Palestinian connection is not biblical. On a word sense or anything like that. As far as I know, there's not a Philistine on earth right now. So what Khan appears to be saying is that this...
How did you say that?
Huh?
There is no Palestine. How you prove that?
There's prophecies about the Philistines being driven out and killed. Goliath was a Philistine. David, far as I know, I could be wrong. I think David killed all the Philistines. All right, we'll have to look into that. But as far as I know, there is no Philistines in existence. Okay. Now the other thing is how he gets to that argument. Like I've already said this earlier, but I'll kind of say it in order because there's people here. As far as I know, the land was given the name. I think it was by Emperor Trajan as Palestine during that time. All right. So it's not connected to the Philistines, the land of Philistia or something like that. I think people make the argument, oh, well, the Muslims say, what did they say, Philistine or Palestine? I can't remember exactly how they say it. But they're like, oh, well, since the Muslims say it like that, it's the same thing as Philistia. Well, there's a problem there, Yes, Arabic language and Hebrew is cognate languages, and you can do things like that. But you also got to watch out for fallacies concerning that. Just because a word sounds the same doesn't necessarily mean that it goes back to the same consonantal roots and all of those things like that, okay? Now, I could do a deeper analysis later on. I bought the book, okay? It was on Kindle for like $2. So I bought the book by Khan, and I'll go into it in more detail if I need to. But I haven't read it yet. I'm just referring to the documentary right now. And so that's questionable, okay? I don't believe that there's a link there. Also, what he's essentially doing, he's not, if he was just saying, oh, well, it's the spirit of the Philistines. In other words, it's the same demon that's behind the Philistines that were trying to attack Israel is the same that's behind the world today. I have no problem like that. Isn't there 3 books? There is the books that I know that he's written are the Harbinger, the Shemitah, and there's a couple others, and then there's this dragon book. I don't know if it's a Chronicles. Maybe he made a fictional one and a non-fictional one. I don't know. But the one that I bought is called Dragon Prophecy. Now, there's a fictional name for it that I did see in searching, but I don't think it's by the same author. So I'll look into that. Thanks for asking that question. So essentially, what he's saying is that just as Israel's being resurrected, which I don't believe Israel's being resurrected right now, I don't think 1948 was fulfillment of prophecy. It's stage setting, yes, but it's not fulfillment of prophecy. Two different things. And so that goes back to what I was talking about, Janet, about having to read Ezekiel 36 and all that. I don't believe any of that's happened yet, except for the Babylonian captivity and the dressing of the immediate audience. So he's basically saying that just as Israel is resurrected, the spirit of the dragon's resurrected, the spirit of anti-Semitism. I'm fine with that. I have no problem with that, right? I mean, I say that. The problem is that he's making these claims that Philistia has been resurrected. The Philistines have been resurrected in the Palestinians. And then he goes to passages just because it mentions Gaza and then reads all of this stuff into the Old Testament. That's eisegesis, you know? That's newspaper eisegesis. It's not even exegesis. You know, that it's that type of approach like that. But here's the thing. A lot of people are going to jump on the bandwagon of this book because it starts out talking about October 7th. It talks about Iran. It talks about a little bit like the political side of things. And it can be used to support, you know, pro-Israeli policy. And so some dispensationalists are going to like it because of that. But here's the thing. If you have your church, and supposedly this is the #1 bestseller right now, and it's a DVD being shown everywhere. If you have your church see this, you've exposed in the Jonathan Cahn. And in my own personal church, I've encountered people, not recently, not within the last few days, I've encountered people with Jonathan Cahn books, and I've had this conversation with them, you know, about this other stuff, you know, the Harbinger, Dave James, the reactions, all of that type of stuff, and explaining the hermeneutics. And not even in a dispensationalist church, but the premillennial. But here's the thing. Just understand this, that this harms dispensationalism in the long run. This harms Israeli, pro-Israeli, or maybe I shouldn't say pro-Israeli. I would say pro-Israel. Okay, pro-Israel perceptions that are biblical. Let's just say it like that. Your church gets exposed, and now it's fine. If you're in a dispensational church where you understand these distinctions, you know where Jonathan Cahn is going wrong, and you're walking somebody through, and you say, hey, you know, if you want to watch, what's that show about Jesus that everybody talks about, The Chosen or whatever? You know, I've watched a few episodes. I haven't watched them all. But if you have a church where you can, like, teach people, look, let's evaluate this critically. Let's see, okay, this is a work of art. This is fiction. This is where they're compromising. This is where they're bringing this in. This is their assumptions here. Then it could be a teaching device. Not a problem. The problem is most churches in the United States are not dispensationalists. And just like they can't discern Chosen, they definitely can't discern a movie like this. They can't discern Jonathan Cahn's material. So then they think that, oh, it's pro-Israel, it's great, you know. Yeah, but at what extent? It's compromising. Then you got people in the church thinking they're Jews, thinking they're this, and it just becomes another form of, people don't like the term replacement theology or supersessionism or fulfillment theology, whatever term you want to call yourself, and they want to flip it back and say, oh, well, dispensationalists believe that churches replaced Israel temporarily. Like, yeah, so what's your point? The issue is about ultimate replacement. God has not broken his covenants, and God will fulfill his covenants with the parties of which he made. All right? And there's all that distinction. And we could talk about covenants and all those things later on. But my point is, it's ultimately going to harm the churches. People are going to have a wrong perspective of Israel and of the church in the long run. It might garner some short-term political support. It might sway the election in a certain area, with a pro-Israel president or something like that in the short term. But ultimately, it's setting people for failure. So you got to ask yourself, what is Satan's main thing? He's a counterfeiter. He wants people to think the tribulation's already started, that prophecy's being fulfilled. Because as soon as they jump out there on a limb, making a claim, that people, the opposing sides, will discredit you and say, see, look at y'all. This is what it leads to. Y'all are fanatics. And then that supports the attitude of skepticism and criticism, which also supports anti-Semitism. That's the big picture of all of this. How he says, what if we just interpret events through the biblical worldview where there are archetypes of characters hanging exemplified as signs for us to support or avoid? Well, that's a narrative approach, and it is helpful in that. But the way that the archetypes work is you have a symbol, a character, an illustration, right? But you have a referent, okay? So a symbol, an illustration, or something like that can be used for multiple reference. But that doesn't mean that Israel is the church. For example, like 1 Peter. I prefer the view that it's talking to Jewish Christians when it says you're a royal priesthood, chosen nation, and all of that stuff. But the other view that's even within dispensationalism is that it's saying that Gentiles in the church, or the church itself, takes on the role as the high priest service and all of that. It doesn't mean Israel's not going to take on that role in the future. It means that right now the church is being faithful. It's hard to say the church is being faithful. Let's just say God is putting up with the church right now until I guess you say the fullness of the Gentiles, if you want to use Romans 11 language, is complete. So the problem is when you use narrative criticism, but you don't recognize how the motifs relate to the reference. And that's where conflation and collapsing of categories and blurring occurs. So, but the idea about signs to support or void, I mean, you can, that's application, that's principles, If people would just do this whenever they study the Bible, what is similar and what is different between the Bible world and the modern world I live in now? What is similar and what is different? Is God doing the same thing in the church that he did with Israel? Or so on and so on. If people would just think about that, they would draw more accurate principles. And I have videos on all that go into details about bridging those grammatical gaps and historical, cultural, chronological, all of those gaps in interpretation. And the problem is when people jump. Well, most churches don't know how to apply the word, don't know how to discern these things, evaluate this. And so they're just going to fall. What good is it to have a church that supports Israel, but your congregation is caught up in Jewish mysticism? Why are we listening to any rabbis right now, especially if they're unbelievers? Why would we be looking at prophecies about them? Yeah, it's stage setting that there's a Sanhedrin. If you want to talk about a red cow, and me personally, I don't think the Antichrist is going to be too concerned about what type of sacrifices he uses to deceive the nation of Israel, and things like that. I'm just speaking in general. I know this stuff can be nuanced, but people are setting up these scenarios. It's like, in some ways, I can understand why you got people like Chris Lucas that want to be so against Daniel 9:27. I think he's wrong, and then he's trying to make jumps and leaps and saying you can't hold to pre-trib and his view of Daniel. He takes that as referring to Jesus. Like, well, actually you can. It may not be logically consistent, but people can hold inconsistent views at the same time. But if it is inconsistent, one has to establish it on what grounds. And there's all these hidden assumptions that are involved there. Like, okay, what if I concede in this area or I grant you this? How would that affect that view? And I'm willing to have debates like that because I want to see how is this doctrine tied to this other doctrine, you know? Because essentially what Chris Lucas is saying is, look, if you don't have my view of Daniel 9:27, you can't be saved. Because he's saying Jesus is the covenant. The salvation is by entering a covenant and through covenant keeping, you know. And so he wants to go on these rants about everybody, all these problems about Daniel. And by the way, he said, oh, so you're ready to debate Daniel 9? I said, I've said repeatedly, even in the debate, if you want to debate the soteriology implications of Daniel 9, we can do that. And then after that's done, if you want to deal with the eschatology of it, fine, we'll do that. But don't use the covenants debate as a way to try to prop up your agenda in that area. And that's exactly what he was doing. He really, but keep in mind, he really thinks Daniel 9 was really going to defeat, 9:27 specifically, was going to defeat my claim that covenants are not soteriological, they're sociological. He really thought that. It's like, I gave him videos, a warning. You can see my debate preps. You can see the shorts that I'm making from that because he gets louder and louder after these debates. And so it's like, okay, well, fine. I'm gonna do a death by 1,000 shorts and show you exactly how many times you got cut, you know, on this particular issue and why it doesn't follow, so that you can, when next time we debate, you can come back stronger, you know, on these particular issues. Hey, Hudson, he says, Hudson said, would you agree with the language of Israel program as valid articulation when discussing dispensationalism? I have no problem with the word program, you know. I told Chris Lucas to debate George Antonius Daniel 9 because he recently wrote a book on Daniel. Yeah, that's a great idea, you know. And after they debate, because Dr. Antonius, as much as I appreciate him, he holds to dispensational salvation. So he may not view Daniel 9 the same way I do. And I would like time to evaluate Dr. Antonius's views and maybe even get his commentary, you know, to do that. So, yeah, I would love for him and Chris Lucas to go at it first. That way I could be more specific. I actually prefer that. If the better I understand my opponent's position, and the better I can find somebody that lines up closer to me, that's why I like it when Chris Morris goes before me. You know, makes things, Chris Morrison goes before me, makes things a lot easier in my debate prep. But a lot of times, I go before Chris, and it makes it easier on Chris. So, you know, it works both ways. So, yeah, so the issue about Chris Lucas is he's ranting against this. You know, and it's Seventh-day Adventist mindset, even though he's not a Seventh-day Adventist per se, ranting against this other views of eschatology that's at an extreme. And Satan loves extremes. He'll get two people holding two different views at two different extremes. And no, I'm not trying to say that there's a golden mean or moderation or the truth is in the middle. I'm not saying that. If the truth is at an extreme, then by all means fight for the truth. But the problem is that what I'm seeing, whether it's from Jamie or whether it's from Chris, is their views are not holding up. Okay? And it's not a problem of their views not holding up. It's a problem of them saying things like, well, Chris saying dispensationalism dies September 27th. Well, did dispensationalism die, guys? And you know, other things like that. And then him having buyer's remorse, or I wish I should have done this better in this debate. If I would have said this, or I was gaslighted, or, you know, all the excuses he's making for this. And then you got Toronto Bible, right? Toronto Bible, of course, in his anti-dispensationalism, doesn't even understand dispensationalism very well. That's why I'm making shorts from videos to show his issues with that, right? So you have all these different angles of people coming at things, and I can understand why they reacting to these extremes. Like, I'm not riding with John Hagee and his view that Israelites are automatically saved, pretty much. You know, I'm not in this sensational dispensationalism. I'm about academic dispensationalism, the Council of Dispensational Hermeneutics, the other stuff that's out there by academics in scholarship, not this popular stuff that is basically a straw man of what dispensationalism is. And, it's just like, where are all the debaters? And so what I did was on Twitter, I said, look, I challenge anybody to formally debate the Dragon Prophecy. Not because I disagree with what it said about the news, not because I disagree about the anti-Semitism. I disagree with how Jonathan Cahn treats the biblical text. Okay? That's the issue, And so hopefully people that are non-dispensationalists will say, okay, that's interesting that Charles, who is a dispensationalist, doesn't agree with this video that, for all practical purposes, it should motivate him if everything that he believes in is really all about supporting the nation of Israel, as people are stereotyped doing, Look, Ted Cruz did the best he could with what he had, okay? His father has spoken at the Schaefer Seminary Conference and all that. Ted Cruz did the best with what he could, but Tucker Carlson tried the same traps that I feel like even C.J. Cox tried on me in the debate. It was about the Messiah in particular, but it was about the nation of Israel. When Ted Cruz was asked the question, are you saying that the political nation of Israel that exists right now is prophesied in the Bible in Genesis 12:3? And Ted Cruz said yes. Ted Cruz is wrong. There is no 1948 prophecy that has been fulfilled. It's not stage setting. Ted Cruz is wrong. And I have good dispensational scholars that agree with me in that. And, I don't... hopefully Ted Cruz will get discipled more in that particular area and people will have influence. But he was wrong in that. But, I mean, the reality is that right now the nation of Israel is mainly unbelievers. The nation of Israel has been temporarily set aside. There is no theocracy on existence right now. Let me put it this way. You have the nation of Israel. Let me say it like this. This is probably more accurate. You have the nation of Israel and you have the state of Israel. The nation of Israel is what's prophesied, a theocratic nation in the Bible. The state of Israel that came into existence in 1948, it's stage setting, it's not prophecy. The state of Israel can cease to exist and God can still fulfill his prophecy. The reason being is because the political entity that's in existence, the people that are in power, Netanyahu and other people like that, is not what's needed to fulfill the prophecy. What's needed to fulfill the prophecy is God to preserve, for simplistic purposes, the DNA of Israel. That means, hypothetically, if Israel was wiped off the map over there, at least far as the infrastructure and all that, there's enough Jews in America to fulfill the prophecy. Now, I'm all for supporting Israel, and I'm all for Israel, the state of Israel. Let's put it that way. The state of Israel going to war like any other nation. Every nation is sovereign and it has its rights. Okay, so you let other people deal with that issue. I don't deal with that stuff. I deal with the biblical issues, okay? But if we were just talking on a secular level, every nation has the right to go to war. You also got the right to face the consequences. But anyway, you have that. Now, let me try to catch where I'm going at with all this. So, the nation of Israel, or the state of Israel, the Israelis, if you want to use that term, that's not prophecy. What's promised is that God will preserve his word with the people and bring them into the land. And the land boundaries are way bigger than what's in existence right now. And what Satan want to do, he wants to counterfeit it. It's interesting that the Abrahamic Accords and all of this type of languages, and you can see all the stuff in the news, and it's like, man, if I were just looking at news and not the Bible, what would I think? I would think prophecy is being fulfilled, the tribulation has begun, it's about to begin, and all of this other stuff. But you got to make your decisions based on the Bible. And so, I debate free grace theology. Let me tell you why I debate free grace theology. Number one, I was asked to do it, I saw the need to give a better articulation of eternal security. SFT saw that I could do that, and he started getting me doing things informally, and then that became formally. The reason I debate free grace theology is because it's closely tied to the gospel, and it's closely tied to Christian growth. And in addition to that, it's closely tied to introduction to hermeneutics and exegesis and inductive study. Second of all, the reason I'm debating eschatology right now, in ecclesiology, I need to have more specific debates on ecclesiology concerning dispensationalism, is because of the fact that it leads to inductive study. It's arrived from inductive study, exegesis, and all of this. And so it's like, okay, look, I'm not the one that's out there that's prolific in dispensationalism. But here's the reality. There are people that are dispensationalists that are not formally debating, that are prolific. All right? And so it's like, okay, well, I'm a popularizer. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to expose people to the information. I'm going to mention how these other people view it. I'm going to bring up my articulations that I've done in seminary and videos and other things like this, and give people tools to evaluate and navigate these things. All right? That's important to me. That's my passion. And that's really what my goal is I just use the debates and all this other stuff to channel everything into emphasizing those things like that. Now, let me read what Hudson says here. He says, would you say Christian Zionism is different than political Zionism? Because I don't necessarily want to support unbelieving political Israel and all that they do. Yeah, that is one way to put it. However, when you study like the history of all of this stuff, you see how God was providentially even working through the political stuff, So I think what people just need to understand is what dispensationalists are actually claiming, what academic dispensationalists are actually claiming. We're not claiming that 1948 is a prophecy. And if you find a dispensationalist that wants to claim that 1948 is the fulfillment of the prophecy and all of that, then have him formally debate me. I have no problem debating free grace. I have no problem debating another dispensationalist. In fact, if another free gracer, if another dispensationalist defeats me in a debate, like gives better arguments, something greater explanatory power, I embrace that. I get checked by professors and friends and peers all the time. I'm held accountable, So I embrace that. And the cause goes forth. Because all I really care about is the exegesis stuff. So, yeah. So, I'm not even going to go into the Charlie Kirk stuff. Or the Candace and all of that stuff. I'm not even going to go into all of that. But the reality is this. Everything works towards, regardless of whether it's an act of God, an act of a counterfeit, regardless of all of it, the ultimate trend is anti-Semitism. That's what it comes down to. All right? That's the initial thing. What I essentially think is going on right now is I think Satan is trying to make people think we're in the tribulation or that it's about to begin. Janet's country right now is rocking like crazy, having earthquakes all over the place. Yeah, the Ring of Fire's there, and you got volcanoes and all of that stuff. You got that going on. But you know what? We're in Barbados right now. And if this is the tribulation, wow, the tribulation is a beautiful place. You know what I mean? Uh, the whole world will be affected by the tribulation. Okay?
Except Charles and Janet.
Well, yeah, the whole world will be affected by the tribulation whenever it occurs. And so I think really what's happening in the news, everybody's setting all this up. There's this expectation, there's this desire for a world leader. I mean, it's been there. There's nothing new about all that, right? But if you just look at the news and not the Bible, and I mean not the Bible intensively, I'm going to tell you this right now, and anyone can challenge me for formal debate. Nobody looks at the Bible as close as a dispensationalist. If you're not a dispensationalist and you use the hermeneutic that dispensationalism arrives from, some people say dispensationalism is a hermeneutic. I take it as a theology and a methodology that arrives from this one hermeneutic. If you are not a dispensationalist and you use the dispensational methodology, just use that term, to interpret the Bible world and draw principles, you will be a more accurate exegete and expositor of Scripture. So if you're not a dispensationalist, you should have enough skill to just say, okay, here's the Bible world, here's the modern world, here's what's going on in the church. It's not exactly the same. However, there's these literary narrative motifs, and there's the biblical theology connections and intertextuality, and you could arrive at a similar application of the dispensationalists. But what do people do? They want to criticize dispensationalism. They want to mock dispensationalism. They want to, and I'm like, dude, I will challenge your hermeneutics every day of the week. Your views on typology, whatever it may be. And maybe I'm too conservative in certain areas, but the reality is that here's the test, guys. When you're debating a Calvinist, are you going to go beyond the Council of Dort? Are you going to go beyond the 1689 Confession, Westminster, London, Belgic, whatever, which one you pick? Are you bound by the confession, or are you really an exegete? Now here's the problem. Most of the grammarians, most of the exegetes in the world are non-dispensationalists, non-free grace, and usually Calvinists, and Arminian too as well. So here's my point. If they're doing that work, right? They're doing that work, and you come to the text, and you study not only their work, but also your work and the other side's work, who has a better command to hermeneutics and exegesis? But whenever they get arrogant and they only adopt their complementary hermeneutic, that's a shot at to progressive dispensationalists in a negative way. Shot at, more like it. If you develop, you're already not yet. If you go with this redemptive move or redemptive hermeneutic and all of these things like that, and you dismiss dispensationalism out of hand and mock it, you're trash. I don't care if you're the best grammarian in the world. I don't care if you're the best exegete in the world. The reality is that you're bound by your theology. That's what I love about free grace, and that's what I love about dispensationalism. Free grace allows me the freedom to study the text inductively and exegetically to the point where I could even change my views. I could change my view from being free grace to being lordship. I could change my view from being dispensational to covenant theology, new covenant, progressive covenantalism, and all of that. Everybody else is locked in. And the way that I'm willing to establish that is I'm willing to debate anyone and everyone. Because I don't care. I have no allegiance. I commend Dr. Woods and his evaluation, his recommendation for the video. But ultimately, I think the video is going to cause harm. And he's the president of the seminary I go to. Guess what, guys? Seminary professors don't agree with each other. People that write in journal articles don't agree with each other. Groupthink's not a good thing, guys.
But that doesn't mean.
Hey, Smokey, what's up, man? Groupthink. What'd you say, Sawako?
But that doesn't mean that it's nonsense.
No.
It means that you can grow to each other.
Right. Well, see, the issue is that used to we would say, okay, there's the Catholic hermeneutic and the Protestant hermeneutic. Okay? And you can look at Bernard Ram's Protestant Biblical Interpretation, Robert L. Thomas's Evangelical Hermeneutics. You can look at books like that have that. All right? But that's a bit reductionistic. Used to, what we would say is dispensationalists are the ones that consistently appeal to the literal hermeneutic. Because the opposite of literal is not figurative, it's allegorical. And allegorical is where the magistrate or whoever it is assigning a meaning that's not in the text. And they're claiming an authority to interpret in a way where the meaning is not in the text. It's behind the text, it's in front of the text, it's somewhere else, but not in the text. And that's a problem against the privacy of the priesthood believer, the competence and all of that stuff. But used to, what we would say is this. Protestant and I've used this in my debates. Protestant hermeneutics follows this approach. And Ryrie did it like normal, plain, literal. Some say literary, and all this. But what I've noticed, and you can go look at Church and Fans' video and Dan Chapa's video where they're talking about, and I asked them this question, is it the same hermeneutic as dispensationalism? I think that's the question I asked. And they said no. And they were interacting with Kaiser's book, and I think the other book that I mentioned to Dan Chapa was about different ways going beyond theology. So here's my point. Dispensationalism is the only ones doing consistent hermeneutics. In fact, the other positions are now abandoning it and they're admitting it. They're saying we're doing a redemptive. You know what the word redemptive is code word for? Covenant theology. The covenant of redemption. That's what that is. The blurring of Israel and the church, using these motifs. One of the books that's come out by Bell that supposedly shows all the interconnections and stuff behind the Bible and everything that's being released and all that. It's gonna be horrible for the church. Now, of course, if you're in a dispensational church, or you're in a church that can evaluate these things, then you can say, yeah, that's great. He pointed out this connection in this passage. It's always good to look at allusions, echoes, callbacks, whatever term, intertextuality. Those things are all good to look at, right? But the problem is when you conflate references and you don't see the distinction between Israel and the church and those other problems like that. Hey, 8033. Nia Hussein Zada. Hey, Charles, want to hear your opinion. Is it a good idea to start a conversation with an EO from dispensationalism or something else? Clarify that. Start a conversation with the Eastern Orthodox from dispensationalism. Okay, I think what you're saying is this. Should you debate an Eastern Orthodox about dispensationalism? So, my response is this. And I think the Eastern Orthodox, for the most part, they've been cowards. At least when it comes to me personally. Let me tell you why. Janet's laughing because she calls me a coward all the time. But it motivates and challenges me. Anyway, they're cowards. Only Sarah from Hamilton, Cobain, debated me. And it was on justification, right? The Catholics have had more cojones, okay? Dr. Sejenis debated me on justification. Taylor Barrett thought he could do better than him, so debated me on justification. East to West theology. 2 Catholics debated Chris Morrison and I on that. And there's one more Catholic, I can't remember his name, that's done that. The Catholics are willing to formally debate free grace people. Now, there's some that don't. I've challenged them. They won't debate for whatever reasons. But you know what? I've fired shots at everybody. Craig Triglia, Jay Dyer, all of them. And then whenever they make their prideful posts on Twitter that, oh, well, the Eastern Orthodox and about church tradition and all this, I say, look, if free grace is true, none of that matters. Because it's true. Think about that, guys. If free grace is true, none of those other claims matter. And this is what I'll say. If free grace is true, then whenever you're debating the EO, he shouldn't have as much problem recognizing dispensationalism. Because if it's true that free grace emphasizes the gospel and Christian growth and makes a clear and consistent distinction between what people typically call justification and sanctification, which I prefer to call positional, experiential, ultimate, or if you want to use, I got another column chart, actually saved versus, got to remember what it is. I can't remember my 4A's right now. I've only used that in a few debates, but I got that in my back pocket for when you're dealing with people that think salvation is a process. So essentially what I'm saying is they want, just like Syngenis, they want to go after dispensationalism. Just like Sam Frost, they want to go after dispensationalism. And it's a distraction. It really is. All right? And now I'm calling them out, and I'm, okay, fine, I'm willing to debate you on that stuff. Why? Because of the way the world's going right now. Nobody else is debating it, so I'm going to have to be the one that does it. I'm just a substitute until someone more qualified comes along, or someone as equal qualified comes along, however way you want to put it, that debates dispensationalism in those particular areas. And yeah, I know there are other people doing it, but I'm referring to the academic versus us popularizers. So it's a distraction. Let me make a comparison here, Niaz. My wife has a Oneness Pentecostal sister. She has a SDA sister and all of that.
Catholic.
The Catholic influence and stuff like this. What I've always emphasized is talking about Jesus is God. All right? And Janet does that. Janet's very good at that. But here's the problem. Whenever you're dealing with United Pentecostal, it depends on the one you're talking to.
Yeah,
Why debate the Trinity with them whenever the real issue is they think baptism saves?
Yeah.
So it's like that. If you emphasize free grace, and free grace is closest to the gospel in my view, and Christian and the best model of sanctification, then you cut through all of that. And so I think that y'all need to destroy free grace. Destroy free grace, then destroy dispensationalism, and then open up my world. Make it easier for my channel to grow. Because I want my channel to grow. You know, I don't like being poor, okay? I just straight up tell you. And I want God to bless it and all of that stuff. And I know he blesses truth. But the reality is that I don't benefit from staying niche, you know. So let me see here. Nia said, cool, reading Free Grace Soteriology by Anderson. David now definitely recommend. Yes, are you reading the second edition or the third edition? Yeah, Dr. Rettman also, he edited it. Yes, that's good. And Smokey says, what areas are your dispensations, Charles? Salvific, covenantal law. Okay, so, right. Janet can actually answer these questions. So, Smokey, let me go broad real quick, and let me say this. The number of dispensations one holds to, or the number of covenants one holds to, is not the sine qua non of dispensationalism. In other words, dispensationalists can differ on those things because those are supposed to be derived from the biblical text. Oh, I see a covenant here. I see a dispensation here. Okay, so the next issue is, when you're studying the Bible, are you event focused or are you narrative focused? And so then that deals with structure and all of that stuff. Are you going to include explicit arguments or implicit arguments? Now, I've developed something called biblical codism that I've written a paper, which is dispensationalism, but it evaluates things according to codes. That way, just like my chart, position, experience, ultimate, then I put stuff in there, or I can add other columns and all that stuff. I had these slots for the codes. That way you don't have to be locked in to saying, oh, well, this is a dispensation or this is a covenant. You could say they're all codes. Now let me tell you why, in addition to this being a code, it's a dispensation. It's a covenant. Some have the apparent structure as covenants, others don't. You can evaluate things in that way. So, but here's another thing. How you define a dispensation also affects how many dispensations you see. Like, for example, are dispensations only with man? Are they only involved during time periods? If so, that would affect whether you see eternity past, the angels, or eternity future, or the new heavens and new earth, those things like that. You would rule those out as dispensations. But if you think that they're with man, then you would say, okay, there's 7 dispensations. There's 4 dispensations. Right now, I think based on the narrative of the biblical text, there's about 4. Okay, for sure. When you go look at the doctrinal statement for Dallas Theological Seminary, Tyndale Seminary, as well as Schaeffer Seminary, they all take this view that there's at least 3 dispensations. There is the Mosaic Law Code, by whatever name you want to call it. There's the Millennial Kingdom, and then there's the time in between, which is the church. Okay? Well, then the argument is, and of course, Ryrie does a good job in dispensationalism for this, is they say, well, okay, there's a Mosaic Law. That means there was something before the Mosaic Law. Well, we see that we got the Abrahamic promise and Abrahamic covenant mentioned here. Some people see multiple Abrahamic covenants, but regardless of that. And then they say, well, there was something before the flood because of Noah. So you got a distinction there. Then is there something different after the fall? Those issues like that. So, you can evaluate and things like that. So, I don't make covenants. My claim is that neither the kingdom nor dispensations nor covenants are soteriological. They're sociological. They refer to group and group regulation distinctions. So I wouldn't view any dispensation as salvific. I wouldn't view any covenant as salvific. And the word law is too restrictive. The word Torah means instruction. And so I'm like, what type of instruction is involved? Context through progressive revelation shows what's being revealed at that time, and that's why I use the term code. And then Hudson says, do you know if Karl Barth was a dispensationalist? All I know about Karl Barth is he's a neo-Orthodox. And to properly read him, I think you got to know German. Because I had a friend who was working on a degree with me that went into working on a doctorate. And they had to start learning German to read Karl Barth, if I remember right. Because the articulation of the Trinity seems to fit the dispensational view. I don't know. Dispensationalists view the Trinity as ontological as well as economic. And you can have different views like eternal generation, eternal subordination. You can have different views within that. 3rd edition on Logos. Okay. Yeah. So, since you're reading Niaz, the 3rd edition of Free Grace Soteriology, pay attention to the forward or wherever they talk about the changes they made in the 2nd edition. I have both editions as well. And if I remember right, one of them was related to the pre-trib thing. Okay, Hudson says, have you read J.B. Hicks's book, Freely by His Grace, Classical Grace Theology? Yes. Have I read every single article in there? No, I haven't. I've used it in writing papers. I referenced them. Or that book also contains various papers by, I think, Zuck, a couple other people that I've read in other resources. But have I sat down and read the book all the way through? I've done some stuff in the stream, and I've done stuff on Kindle reading fast. But I can't tell you, like, every single thing that's in there. So that clears up things. But yeah, I know a lot of the people that are in there either directly or indirectly. So, yeah, it's a good book. Niaz says, by the way, do you hold a single new covenant, multiple participation view, or is there only a view? That's a great question. So, there's a presentation on my channel that Peaceful Banana did over the introduction of the New Covenant book that was edited by Cone. That has Charlie Clough, Gilly, Shirley Clough, Gilly. Let's see who else. Cone. Um, there's a couple others in there, but they're all arguing for the idea that the new covenant is not in operation right now. There's another new covenant book, and this is in Logos 2, by edited by Dr. Stollard. Dr. Stollard is, I can't remember his exact position, but he's like director or something of council of dispensational hermeneutics. He was my professor for theological method. Wrote his dissertation, if I remember right, on Emil Gears, who had a, oh no, it wasn't on Emil Gears. It was on Gabeline. But he did a paper on Emil Gears, and Emil Gears had developed the sine qua non, the dispensationalism, pretty much in spirit before Ryrie ever even thought about it. So there's that aspect of things. But and you can find just such a Mike Stollard. He was Friends of Israel director and other things like that. He does a lot of things. But that book gives the different views of the new covenants as well. Let me tell you where I'm at. My friend E. Dane Rogers, who is both a peer and he's already got his MBS, and he's also part of True Grace Publishing, which is what used to be Grace. I forgot the one that Roxer and Stegall and them all did. That merged with that. I think there's the merging. It's a proper word there. So you got True Grace Publishing, and Dane, when he was, I can't remember what class it was, maybe Israelology. I wired up Dane to take the single covenant Israel only view, okay? Because at that time I was extremely skeptic of the other views of the new covenant, even though I had read a lot of different things by different people on that issue. I was skeptic of it because I felt like that their hermeneutics were borrowed from non-dispensationalists. Now, this was before Cho's book, The Hermeneutics of the Biblical Writers, came out, and also Radelnik and some of those other books that have brought clarification about the actual hermeneutics, how the writers of the Bible apply hermeneutics in the Bible. So because of the book, 3 Issues of Contemporary Dispensationalism, edited by Bateman, where Elliot Johnson, Stanley Toussaint, Daryl Bach, Craig Blazing, and others, I think S. Lewis Johnson, they're going back and forth on these different issues. It was a warning about picture exegesis that progressive decisionism kind of argues in. And so because of that, I was really conservative. You could find me speaking and interacting with Dr. Stephen Gare, as well as, I think, Dr. Mark McGinnis at the 2019 Schaefer Conference, asking questions about this stuff and talking about some of the hermeneutics at various question and answer sessions in the videos. And I was very skeptic of some of those procedures. And so I wired up Dane, based on, studying with them, influence them, giving my arguments for a single covenant Israel only, because if it's true, single covenant Israel only, that's the view that doesn't come close, not even question there any type of blurring distinction between Israel and the church, right? Well, my professor, Jeremy Thomas, marked up that paper, shredded it, okay? And then I took some classes. I took Israelology, and I also took dispensationalism class with Jeremy Thomas and a couple other things. And I started realizing, look, I can explain this in different ways wherever I'm not compromising hermeneutics. And so that opened me up a lot, especially whenever there's other developments in hermeneutics. Forgive me if I'm not always looking at the camera. My mind is thinking and going places and stuff like that. And so the current view that I hold to right now is kind of like a foretaste view, that there's the new covenant promises spiritual blessings and geophysical blessings. The church, through Christ, mediating the new covenant, which I call the Abrahamic blessing inheritance that's flowing to the church, Gentiles are able to be equal inheritors with Israel on that. I don't think that's about salvation. Ephesians 2 is not about salvation in my view, in that sense. It's about inheritance, that there was no assurance or promises that Gentiles would ever be equal inheritors like Israel. But in the church, they are equal inheritors. That doesn't do away with certain distinctions and promises. It just talks about the relationship within the church now, the metaphorical body of Christ. So Christ is the mediator of the covenant. And we enter in, you could say it like this: we enter in through Jesus Christ, not replacing Israel or not through Israel. So you got that idea. But the geophysical blessings as well as the spiritual blessings will be fulfilled in the kingdom. Now, the new covenant, I believe, was paid for, ratified at the cross. Chris Lucas recently tried to say, I don't know that, or he says some outlandish things like, dude, you're supposed to have been watching my channel for years and you don't know my views on these things, but my point is that I currently hold to that the new covenant, the spiritual blessings do flow to the church or Gentiles within the church. But the geophysical blessings as well as the spiritual blessings in addition to that, I don't believe the new covenant is soteriological. Israel is already saved whenever they receive the new covenant in the tribulation, in my view. When the body of Christ began, they were already believers that were placed into the body of Christ. So the only time that you have unbelievers entering into the new covenant is at the end of the millennium. Whenever you have a rebellion, right? Because the unbelievers that are born during that time. That's the only time, and it's only when you have a theocracy in operation. There's no theocracy in operation right now. All other times, the new covenant is always with believers. Okay? So that has effects on Federal Vision, some of the arguments with Twitchy we've talked about. Like he thinks, oh, there's unbelievers in the new covenant and other things like that. But all right, let me catch up here. But here's my point. I had PB present the whole book, presentations on the whole book on the single covenant Israel only. Kurt has a different view. I think he's still single covenant Israel only, but he has the view that the Mosaic covenant still continues, but we have died to the law, so we're not under the law, even though it's still going on. The church is not under it. That's his view. He can articulate it. By the way, he's going to be launching his channel. We're going to upload videos just like we did with PB. I like doing that. I like getting new channels started, and all of that stuff. So he's going to upload that stuff. So we're going to be talking about that after I get back from Barbados. So you got all that going on. Let's see, what was I saying? Oh, yeah. I think Taylor, Free Grace Notes, will be doing evaluation of the Mike Stollard book on the New Covenant, which will give multiple views within dispensationalism about the New Covenant. And so that will be helpful. And there's other books that I want presentations done on that have come out. The Rise and Fall of Dispensationalism. There's others, that have come out. Continuity and Discontinuity. There's other books for us to talk about, and evaluate. And don't get me wrong, there's tons of books that I haven't even read yet. And it's like, man, I'm really, really getting out of my comfort zone. And I'm stepping out on faith because I know free grace pretty well, all right? I probably know free grace better than I know dispensationalism, to be honest. Because this is what I've had to emphasize. But if nobody else is debating it or defending it, at least in a way that I feel is totally accurate, then I gotta study, I gotta prepare, I gotta treat it just like I do a seminary assignment, just like a pastor asking you, hey, can you preach this sermon? Can you teach this class? That's what I'm gonna do. And that's how I view debates. That's why I want challenge. That's why I want formal debates. Because I can put it on a calendar, I can prepare, I can treat it like an assignment, meaning I'm focused, I'm sacrificing, I'm giving my best. I can freestyle. Y'all know I can freestyle, both in rapping as well as, thinking and informal stuff. But I prefer the formal stuff because I give the best quality at that time. Sadly, my opponents don't always do that, and I have to mature to the point where that doesn't bother me. I'm working on it, guys. But let me look at some of the comments here. To answer your question, Niaz, I would say multiple participant view. And to be more particular, Israel is the party of the covenant, Gentiles are the beneficiaries. And so the distinction here is that you can never change the parties of the covenant, but you can add on beneficiaries. For example, I explained that, okay, I work for my company and my retirement is with my company, but my wife is my a beneficiary. Now, my wife doesn't work for the company, and the retirement is not with her; it's with me, but she's still a beneficiary. So that allows for you to keep the distinction there. So Nia says, so the church won't ever participate in the new covenant, right? No, I believe the church is participating right now. I believe that and I've written papers on this and videos. I believe that the Abrahamic blessing inheritance is mediated through Christ to the church. It's flowing to the church. During the time of the Mosaic Law theocracy, the Abrahamic covenant was the reservoir, okay? But during the time of the Mosaic covenant theocracy, the Mosaic theocracy was like, I think the way I put it, it's like a dam that shut everything up and then you controlled the tap, okay? When now the theocracy of Israel is no longer in existence on earth, is the way I would put it. It's not in operation right now. The church has temporarily replaced Israel's role. It's not exactly the same, because instead of it being for a whole nation, instead of it being geophysical blessings for the earth, and instead of it unbelievers being a part of it, the church still receives those blessings as Christ mediates them. This is what I think Ephesians is talking about, Galatians and other things like that, to them, okay? And once the church is removed, and yes, I'm pre-trib, once the church is removed, those blessings will be mediated in the tribulation, and they will be mediated in the kingdom. So I hope that clarifies things. Hudson said, is the new covenant not linked to Jesus Christ's physical 1,000-year reign on earth that the church will participate in? All right, so this is a good question too, Hudson. So believers participate, Gentiles, in the church, because Jewish Christians get the spiritual blessings. That's not the problem. Gentile Christians in the church get the spiritual blessings now, right? And according to your faithfulness now will determine your rank and your reward in the kingdom. If you're premillennial and you're dispensational, then you recognize that there will be people with resurrected bodies, and you got other people that go into the kingdom without resurrected bodies. They're able to reproduce, they're able to die. Yes, their lifespan will be expanded and all of that stuff. Okay? So you have that going on. And so the issue with that is when a Jew believes in Christ during the church age, he's added to the church. Now that doesn't mean that his blessings from the Abrahamic covenant are done away with. All right? Fruitenbaum and the Fruit Steps of the Messiah gives a structure for all of this. That could be evaluated. And there's more books that I have that I'm evaluating the relationship of the new heavens and new earth to the kingdom, other things like that. And so I could get more accurate in these particular areas. But just saying this right now, the other issue is, where's New Jerusalem? Is New Jerusalem hovering over the earth? Is New Jerusalem on the earth during the millennial reign? Is the New Jerusalem at the end? There's these other factors like that. Some would say that the church only goes to New Jerusalem, the glorified bodies. Others would say, no, they commute back and forth to work like the Jetsons, in a way, because the church will still have responsibility to rule and reign with Christ. But that rule and reign with Christ and glorified bodies is different than the ruling and reigning of the people that are that survive the tribulation, that are believers, that go into the millennial kingdom. So you could think of a comparison like this. Angels are principality, powers, spiritual wickedness in high places. That's true for the good angels as well as the fallen angels. Well, whenever we have our resurrected or glorified body, some people say it's not the same, but whenever we have a resurrected body, we will still have principalities, powers in place. So there will be ministries for the church. You know, some people say we're training to reign. If we want to use Dave Ramsey stuff, we live like no one else now so that we can live like no one else in the future. You know, that whole idea there. There's those factors like that. So the church will participate in the new covenant. The church is participating in unglorified bodies now, and it will participate in the new covenant in glorified bodies now. But here's the thing. You don't need the new covenant if you have a resurrected body for sanctification. You know, it may be a little bit different. Some people say there's a code with the angels. The angels are held accountable. They don't sin, but they're held accountable and all that. When we have resurrected bodies, well, we still have responsibilities, but we're not capable of sinning. You know, there's distinctions like that. So, also remember, I think the new covenant is primary sanctification. The only time it's not sanctification on an individual level is whenever you have unbelievers born into the theocracy of Israel, when sanctification at the national level is in operation already. All right, so Hudson says, is the new covenant not linked to Jesus Christ? Yes, it is. I already answered that one. Niaz says, Terry Zane, yeah, he's a good guy. Dispensationally, spiritually speaking, he's a master's guy, but he's actually free grace. At least from my conversations with him. Terry Zane made a great case for the Israel-only view, but so did Matthew Bryce Irvin. I got to look up him. I'm not familiar with him. For multiple participants, it gets me confused. Yeah. So what I would do, this is my recommendation, and also you gotta factor in biblical covenantalism. Dr. Paul Hamberry, he's good too. What I recommend you do, Niaz, is watch Peaceful Bananas' presentation on the single covenant Israel only views. Then watch Kurt's criticism. He did evaluations of those views. So that will give you an additional layer. And stay tuned, and we'll do the Stollard book. And there's other books, like I said, to evaluate it. But here's the thing. It's not about trying to decide what the relationship of Israel and the church is. Use these books to pick up proper hermeneutical procedure and principles. That way, if you're picking up why the hermeneutical connections people are making, like the principle and the procedure that's being applied, then what happens is you're internalizing hermeneutics so that when you confront a passage, you're like, okay, I agree with this, I disagree with this because of this. In other words, if you take that approach, it's emphasizing deductive study. It's emphasizing exegesis. It's emphasizing hermeneutics rather than you just trying to come to a doctrine or a theological conclusion. And that puts you in a better position to understand doctrine and theology. Let's see here. Hudson says, you should do a bookshelf review on the books, Charles, especially on free grace and dispensational books. I will. I mean,
I have many books you don't want to publish.
Well, Janet said he don't want to publish any books right now. But no, what he's talking about is doing reviews. I recommend Rev Reads. Rev Reads is probably the top reviewer for that. The Schaefer Journal is doing reviews and books that are included in there. There are things that I've written on, for classes and reviews, like MacArthur's books, Zane Hodges' books, other things like that, things we had to evaluate. Maybe I'll do some of that stuff. But, guys, I have to work a full-time job, and I'm thankful that the Layman Seminary's got to a point where it's a movement. I've always viewed it as a movement, but I get more teachers, more people willing to present. Some people don't like being called teachers, reactors, hosts, whatever term you want to use. People are at different stages. I'm thankful for that because it's not all on me. I'm able to do things in a certain way, and still things continue people's growth and develop. But I miss this. I miss personally talking to y'all. I miss personally teaching the Bible, having time for that. But everything has to tie to what I'm doing in seminary, what I'm doing in my debates, and then I integrate everything else around that. I was blessed to not take a semester. I thought I was going to have to retake for audit purposes, Hebrew 1, right? But the class got dropped. I've already taken my intermediate Hebrews and all that, but I got to take advanced Hebrew in the fall 2026. So originally what I was going to do was I was going to audit Hebrew 1 this semester and then take intermediate Hebrew. No, I was going to audit Hebrew 1, audit intermediate Hebrew 1 this semester, and then audit Hebrew 2 and intermediate Hebrew 2 in the spring, and then I would be ready directly for advanced Hebrew. Well, the class got dropped, right? But it worked out because what it did was, of course, instead of me having to do Hebrew while I'm in Barbados with Janet, I'm able to spend time with Janet, And she's probably glad I'm streaming right now. It gives her a break from me bugging her. Yeah, Janet's agreeing over there. So the issue with that though is this next semester, this spring, I'm going to have to eat and sleep Hebrew, because I'm going to have to catch up on my first year Hebrew. I'm going to have to catch up on my intermediate Hebrew, and then of course all of that's to prepare for advanced Hebrew. So don't be surprised when you start seeing a bunch of Hebrew stuff, streams and whatever, because that helps me and it'll help y'all in advance. There's other things Josh is working on. Some of y'all don't know Josh. He's from my earlier videos. He's on the board of the Layman Seminary and other things like that. He's working on some more inductive Bible study stuff. I talked about that the other video that Jenna and I did. Y'all can check that out. And so, yeah, we got some things we want to work on. Nia says, yeah, would appreciate that. Nia says, have you ever compared free grace glorification with deification theosis views? Good question. And if you watch my debate with Eastern Orthodox, Seraphim Hamilton, I talk about that. It was the first time that I heard theosis used in a context that I was used to was Dr. Michael Svigel of Dallas Theological Seminary was given a presentation, or it was free, but it was they used to have this thing called iTunes University, wherever you could do Dallas Theological Seminary class. Janet's done them all, I think, at least the ones that are offered. She's got lots of certificates. And you have ones on covenants and things like that. Well, Dr. Michael Spiegel did one on the covenants. And when he was talking about the Edenic covenant or the Adamic covenant, can't remember which one, or whether those exist, he talked about theosis. He's written a Christian theology book, 3 volumes with Dr. Holstein and him. He's talked about those things. He's a Calvinist. I've interacted with him in the past. He says he's a nice one, though. So he tolerated me then. I think he tolerates me now. I don't know. But I share his posts and stuff. Yeah. So here's the problem with theosis. Theosis views salvation as horizontal. They might view it on an angle like this, but it's a horizontal approach. In other words, yeah, you got an initial event that sets it in motion, but you got to go through this participation of glorification, and you got to get to this final point for it to occur, okay? And it's making salvation horizontal. And it's taking justification, sanctification, glorification, and it's conflating it all. Now, they want to claim, if you go look at the different views of justification series that's in Logos, the mobile ed videos, I can't remember her name. I quoted it in the Seraphim Hamilton. She's priding herself on, we take justification in a more nuanced view and all that. No, they don't. They might claim that, but they end up collapsing and conflating things. Because when I brought a more nuanced view, and the same thing with Dr. Segenis, whenever I brought a more nuanced view, all they did was complain. They want to say, you're making up categories. Well, wait a minute. What did y'all do? I'm challenging y'all's categories, and I'm saying these categories are correct. So the problem with theosis is when you're viewing it as only horizontal. Now, if you recognize initial justification has eternal results that result in your position never changing in the sense of you're standing before God, like you're guaranteed a glorified body because of that, and you want to talk about how whenever we're in fellowship with God, we're being conformed into the image of Christ, as we're looking into his image, and we're doing all that. All that's biblical. Not a problem there. But that's not what they mean by theosis or deification. So you can have a sanctified, free grace version of theosis. In fact, Niaz, since you mentioned free grace soteriology, and since you are active on Facebook, since you mentioned Terry, I recommend you go to a group called Free Grace Cutting Edge. Dr. Redman, the editor of Free Grace Soteriology, is there. When you're there in that group, you have access to certain books that he wrote, certain papers that he wrote. And he's written some stuff on theosis. He's written some stuff. I love it. Okay, it's challenging. It's good. But Dr. Redman don't want me sharing it. He wants to keep it within that particular group. Now, don't get me wrong. I talk about the ideas and other things like that. And I haven't been active on Facebook. I'm not on Facebook now. Janet is. But yeah, I recommend you join that group and interact about these particular things. So yeah. Crazer says, hi. Hi, Crazer. Hudson said, Eotheosis sounds like Freemasonry trying to become a god. Yeah, well, what does becoming a god mean? You can make an argument. If you check out, oh, that's what I want to mention. iTunes University no longer exists, but Corey Minor, Smart Christians, has a deal with Dallas Theological Seminary, which through Patreon, if I remember right, he has all access to all those courses that Dallas Theological Seminary offered and things. So you can still do it that way. Also, I think you can go through Dallas Theological Seminary certificate program, not the degree stuff. You don't even have to register. You just sign up an email, and you can get access to it. You could probably also search Svigel on the covenants, and it's a portion of his eschatology videos. I think it's Svigel, yeah. And he goes into that, and maybe you can hear some things and appreciate, the concepts of theosis in a safe environment, one you're familiar with, rather than, some of this oddball stuff. Crazer said, yes, we need more church activities. Well, it depends what you mean by church activities. Gods and goddesses don't exist. Okay, so you're not a Christian. But why God exists, not gods?
God exists, not gods.
Okay, all right. He clarified. Well, he's got a razor. I mean, not a razor, a wrench. Thanks. Followed the group. All right, that's cool. Hey, Rachel. Hey, everyone. Hey, Cross Focus. What's up? So, yeah. So, let me see where I want to get at. All right, it's 4:35. So, Janet and I are going to go watch the sunset at the beach. If I had the internet, because I got an eSIM, but it doesn't work. Not for me, and Janet can't get her stuff to work, so we can't go and record it. But, we can record it, we just can't be live at the beach. Even though it's, 100 feet away? I mean, once again, guys, look, it's right there. I got to cross the street, and it's right there. But, yeah. So you'll probably seen how messy it is in here. So yeah, I'll probably land the plane in a few minutes because of that. But oh gosh, well, let me see what I was saying. Yeah, let me say a few words about Toronto Bible real quick. Okay, number one, he doesn't understand dispensationalism. Number two, I have agreed, and I got to because he's like a thorn in my side. And I care about the people that watch him, and I want the spell to be broken. And maybe that'll happen. Maybe it won't. But I want the spell to be broken over those who he has influence over. My problem is not Toronto's views so much as it's his attitude that if you don't agree with me, you're a heretic and a wicked false teacher. That's my problem. If he held to some of his stuff in a moderate charitable way, it wouldn't be a problem. But he's aggressive, and there's no middle ground for him. He's the top 1% free gracer. And honestly, if his view was free grace, I would abandon free grace in a heartbeat. Well, let me be honest about that. I'm the type of person that if I believe something's true, no matter what the consequences are, I would still embrace it. But my heart, the pastoral side of me, if you will, I would not want to be free grace if I was Toronto. Okay, I'm not the best example of everything. That's not my point. The point is, he's making a claim with this syllogism that if you don't agree with my syllogism, you're not free grace. You're a wicked false teacher. That's his typical approach. Hey, Witty, thanks for the beats again. Oh, you got new beats? Cool. Um, so I'm going to be debating him on his syllogism, okay, which is more of a free grace debate. But I'm going to debate him eventually on dispensationalism as well. But Twitchy Theologian already agreed to moderate for us on the free grace debate. Toronto's problem is he burns bridges with SFT and others like that. And then he wants to say, oh, we could just do it on your channel or my channel. Like, come on, man. Yeah, that's fine if Twitchy moderates, but you're not going to get in a stream with me and Toronto. Number one, neither one of us are going to be able to hold our tongue, and it's just going to turn into an informal mess. Okay, we could do that on Christian King. We could do that on Mahler. We could do that on JP, but that's not a formal debate. That's not preparation, close scrutiny, and all of that. That's two different things. That's like me making an album versus me freestyling off the dome, battle rapping or something, I prefer written stuff. And so, yeah, Toronto will be addressed. Toronto will be dealt with. And as far as I know, I've never turned down a debate. So, regardless of your theological position, if it's within my wheelhouse, and I will tell you, I'm not prepared to debate that, or give me some time to learn that. If it's within my wheelhouse, as they say, I will debate it. Anyone, whether in the camp or outside the camp, because I care about truth. And the reason I'm like this is because when I was a kid, I was asking questions, and I was told from a church, you're too young to know this. And that damaged me. I'm not going to church trauma and all that, but it made me like, well, then, even though I got baptized, my teenage years, I'm not getting the answers from the church. This is actually preteen, and then it led into my teenage years, but it messed me up. Like, I didn't know eternal security. I didn't know a proper doctrine of the Holy Spirit, during those times. So I didn't know my identity in Christ. I didn't know my spiritual gift or my purpose or anything like that. And so what do? Find my identity in girls, drugs, and being a wannabe gang member and other things like that, So you got to be able to address people's questions. Create an atmosphere where you don't agree with people. You know what? I don't agree with you, but give me a presentation on that. I'll have another person give a counter presentation. That's how we do things academically in journals and other things like that. And that's what we're doing here at the Layman Seminary. All right, let me hear you out. Let me evaluate it. Give me a book to read. Want to formally debate it? We'll do that. That's what I want. And hopefully y'all want the same thing. All right, so look what this person says. Nick Sayers Dispensation is trying to set up debates on his channel. Is he a dispensationalist? Maria says, they kicked you out of church because you were full of demons. All right, first off, I didn't get kicked out of church. Are you a Christian, Maria? And what gives you the authority to say that I'm full of demons? How do you even know that demon possession occurs now? How do you even know that demon exorcism occurs now?
It occurs to her.
And how did you find this channel? Are you a Christian?
Maybe he's following some Shimon.
And Maria, you're a woman. I had no problem debating a woman. No woman's debating me except my wife, and I always lose to her. But if you don't want to formally debate something, then go get your man, go get your champion, and set something up. Because if you're going to come in here with that stuff, then you need to be addressed. Hey, Quad, what's up? Yeah, Nick is a dispy, but not really because he's not OSAS. Okay. Yeah. So yeah. Okay. That's good to know. I mean, that's good to know. So a good exercise for me is how is he being a dispensationalist but not arriving at eternal security? Is that possible? Yeah, it's possible. Is it logical? Is it consistent? Maybe not. That's the issue there. Um, but that gives me an angle to think about, if I engage with him in the future. I've engaged with him in times past, but not knowing that I can recall. The King James stuff, it's not a big issue for me. I debated, if you want to call it a debate. What was his name? William, no, the older guy that always reads from his blog that's Trojan infested. Um, I don't know. It's in my debate thing. I can't remember his name. Will Kinney. Yeah, Will Kinney. Yeah, and I kind of gave you my approach to those things. And I'm willing to do more debates in that area, because I want the layman seminary to be able to speak on a little bit of everything. That doesn't mean I'm an expert on everything. Um, yeah, I don't know who Pastor Brett is. So another thing that's going on is Kurt is making videos. Now, guys, y'all might think I'm crazy, but Kurt decides what he reacts to. PB decides what he reacts to. Y'all may be shocked to know of how much freedom they have whenever they make videos. Sometimes I'll make a suggestion. I've told people, I'm not really. In times past, I've said certain about current events and other things like that. Anybody else can do that. We want to do something, where people learn, whether people are challenged. But yeah, they have freedom. So Kurt right now, come to find out, which I didn't know in advance, is that he's evaluating a guy that disagrees with Steven Anderson. And I don't even know much about all of that. But I do know this. I challenged Steven Anderson. He didn't take the bait, if you want to call it that. He didn't take the debate, or he didn't take the debate, however you want to say it. The debate, get it? But I challenged him on Twitter. Could Steven Anderson hit me with some how do you say the word hoagie in Greek? Can you tell me how to go to the library in Greek? Or say, he can do some of that. Those little tricks like that. Or he can get me on morphology parsing or whatever. But I think Steven Anderson doesn't know Greek as much as he claims. Syntax-wise, exegetically, I don't think he does. But what I said this, and I put this in a recent post because somebody brought up about the NIFB. I said, when a free gracer debates the NIFB, you will find out who is really hybrid grace. That's what they are. They're hybrid grace. And hybrid grace is just another term for lordship. All right? That's my term that I use because I'm not going to call people hyper because there's different variations of that. Because hyper doesn't mean how the hyper... I am hyper grace. Grace is hyper. No, the word hyper in theological discussion means you go beyond a position. So a hyper dispensationalist is someone that's gone beyond dispensationalism. They're not a dispensationalist in my view. Now there's nuances to that. So a hyper gracer is not grace in my view. They're inconsistent. Now I don't go around saying, oh, this person's not free grace anymore. I say they're inconsistent with free grace. You know why? Because I don't want to be Toronto Bible. And I told him that the other day. And he says, oh, well, you got no backbone. You're coming after me instead of going after Praise I Am and all of that. I've told Praise I Am that I believe that their views are inconsistent with free grace. But he wants me to go after all of them and all of that stuff. It's like, why? What good is it going to do? They make us look bad. They do all this and the wickedness and all that. Well, here's what I know. Let me just say this in general. General principle, not throwing dirt at anybody. Based on what I've seen observances in Discord community, Whenever a Christian is not actively involved in church and discipleship, free grace, they use it for an opportunity for antinomianism tendencies. But if you have free grace taught in the proper environment, the church and discipleship, not a problem. Not a problem. Okay, shocker. Hudson, you're an open theist and KJV only, but I'm not toxic about it. Okay. Well, but there's a open theist provisionist that used to be free grace that reached out to me shortly before I got pressed on some preparation before this trip, and he wants me to come on his channel. And so maybe maybe I'll know more about open theism, dispensationalism, free grace, and is it possible to hold all of them? You said, I'm an antinomium. I hate gnomes. Okay. But do you hate the gnomic present? Do you hate the gnomic aorist? No, I'm just joking. Well, Janet's pacing right now. I don't know if she's recording me, watching me, or what, but it's getting close to 5, which means we need to go watch the sunset. All right. Well, I'm going to close. I'm glad I got to talk with y'all, interact with y'all. I miss doing this type of thing. But yeah, watch old stuff, watch new stuff. It's all good. And keep giving us your feedback so that we can make this movement into what it needs to be. We do have our transcript. Our script for our trailer. We just got to memorize our parts that we developed from the last live, condensing it down to like 90 seconds or something like that. So pray for us as we do that. All right, guys. God bless. Talk to y'all later. And in the words of Janet, the plane is on the ground and I'm going to ride off into the sunset. God bless.